Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into the power of celebrating small wins around our kids' anxiety or OCD. This may seem obvious and intuitive, but most of the time, many of us are not doing this to the level that we can do in order to get the benefits. And we'll talk about what those benefits are, the clinical benefits, the benefits to your child's mental health, but also, believe it or not, to your own mental health. So we'll talk about why that is and how to actually do it in a very productive way. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank OCD for sponsoring this episode. OCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. as well. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if OCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. If you're looking for in-depth support to help your child with anxiety or OCD, I do offer on-demand video courses for you and your kids, and you can check all of those out at atparentingsurvivalschool.com. That's atparentingsurvivalschool.com. All right, so let's talk about this, celebrating small wins. I think this seems obvious, but we don't do it. I know I don't do it as much as I want to do it. And I have to remind myself frequently to focus on the small steps and praise the small steps and find the wins. I do feel like it's become more intuitive for me in the last 2 years. I've really been focusing on my role with my kids' anxiety or OCD and really fine-tuning that. And as you focus on your reactions and your role, it does become more intuitive, but it wasn't a natural thing for me. And so we'll talk about how to do this, but I first want to talk about why. And the why might seem obvious, but let's talk about some whys that may not seem as obvious. The first thing is the reason why motivation is sometimes a barrier in treatment is because people feel hopeless. And so they look at this huge mountain and they think, there's no way I can climb that mountain. That mountain is massive, so I'm not going to even try. And some of our kids might have that mentality for a lot of different things. And I know in my house, I have 3 kids, and even though they all struggle with different forms of anxiety or OCD, the level of go-get-em-ness, because that's not a word, but whatever, is different. And I do feel like there's a little bit of wiring in that where some of our kids get overwhelmed easier. And I notice with my son, who has a comorbid condition around ADHD, along with the anxiety and OCD and restrictive eating, that he tends to feel overwhelmed quicker than my younger or an older daughter. And so that's in general, like that's an executive functioning issue, like tasks in general feel overwhelming for him. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to celebrate small wins more for him, but it's just a really good example of how we perceive tasks in general and how we approach them really can play a part and a role in anxiety and OCD as well. And I know for me, I mentally chunk up tasks to have them be easily digestible. And so that's a skill that I have. Some people don't even have that skill. So for me, if I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have this goal to do, I have this huge project to do, or I have this huge thing to do, I break it up into little tiny to-dos. And so I'll just like get my calendar out and then I'll be like, okay, this week on Monday, you're going to do this, and Tuesday, you're going to do that. And I'll chunk it for myself. And then I don't feel overwhelmed anymore. In fact, a lot of times I'll look at my to-do list and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much to do. And I'll just like move half of it like to the next day. And instantly I'm like, oh, I don't feel overwhelmed anymore. And so My point is, this is true. What I'm about to talk about, this is true for all of us, for all sorts of different things. But sometimes we forget about that when it comes to anxiety or OCD. So when our kids with anxiety or OCD look at the big picture, so the ultimate goal is you need to get back into in-person school, or the ultimate goal is you need to be able to function and do your daily living skills, like get out of bed, eat food, don't take a shower for 5 hours. It's different for each one of us, but I think we all have this ultimate goal to never have anxiety attacks or never have panic attacks or eat in a functional, healthy, normal, quote unquote, sort of way, to gain weight, to not see the world as contaminated, to be able to sit anywhere or eat anything or touch anything. I'm just using random examples of different anxiety and OCD themes because we all have this ultimate goal. For me, with my son, the ultimate goal is that he's got a lot of ultimate goals in my brain, right? The ultimate goal is food is not an issue anymore. He doesn't have a disordered way of looking at food because he has ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. He has an uncomfortable and unhealthy relationship with food. So the ultimate goal is food is not a big deal for him. He can just eat. He doesn't have to worry that he's going to throw up. He doesn't have to worry that he's going to choke. He doesn't have to worry that it's too chewy. He just has this healthy relationship. I guess that would be the ultimate goal. And then I think maybe the ultimate goal with my daughter would be that she doesn't get anxiety attacks anymore at all. She doesn't worry about her bladder with her sensory motor OCD. It's all gone. So we do have these ultimate goals. For me, my ultimate goal with social anxiety is that I never feel socially anxious ever again. So the first step is actually looking at the goal, your ultimate goal. Is your ultimate goal realistic to begin with? My ultimate goal with my son, and I can have as many goals as I want for him and for my daughters, but that doesn't really mean anything, right? That's just an arbitrary thing. We can have goals for our kids, but we're one piece of the puzzle, and it's not our journey, it's their journey, and that goal may not ever come to fruition, and it may not even be their goal. With my son, he may have an unhealthy relationship with food for the rest of his life, and that might just be his journey to deal with. I don't know, right? So for my social anxiety, I think I will always have moments of being socially anxious. I think I will always have moments where I feel rejected and I feel not enough. Can I still do things that are important to me and that I value? Yes, that's the goal, right? Can I still get through those hard moments? I've come to the realization in my 40s. Actually, I'm in my 50s now, but I think, I probably came to that realization in my 50s. I'm almost 52 in a few weeks, that it's okay to still have social anxiety. It's can I manage it? And so that might be the big goal. But when our kids are looking at the big picture, I need to get back into school. And I'm using that one because it's a very concrete one that I think a lot of you are in, or I need to sleep without having any sleep disruption, or I need to take a shower that is 15 to 20 minutes, or I need to wash my hands in a typical amount of time. Whatever it is, kids know the big picture goal, and it can make them feel overwhelmed because it feels too far. It feels unmanageable. And so when we break down those big goals and we get real micro, then we don't present them with a big goal. We present them with a really tiny, doable, manageable step. And I say to kids, break it down into the smallest step that it's almost impossible for them to not succeed. And so sometimes parents will say, well, that's just too easy. I much rather it be too easy than too hard, because a lot of it isn't about jumping and making these big goals to climb that mountain. A lot of it is to give them hope and believe that they can do it. And you need a couple of wins under your belt. And so ideally we want to craft challenges and exposures and tasks that are bite-sized and are setting them up for success. And that can be hard. That might mean that you are cheerleading them for something much smaller than what you think they are capable of doing. You are moving, though, in the right direction. So it doesn't mean that you start really small and then you stay really small because that's the only place where it feels good. You challenge them a little bit more and a little bit more over time. And for some kids, they need to really sit in the wins for a while before they're ready to move on to the next hard step. So we have to watch our pace and we have to match it with their pace, because it's not about our pace, it's about their pace. And if we take the reins and we push on the gas and they're not ready for the next step, everything will crumble, and their belief in their ability to do it, their belief in the work that you're doing with them will fall apart. So picking those small goals is really important. I know when I'm doing like OCD exposures, and when I had kids in my practice and I would create an OCD like exposure menu or an exposure hierarchy, depending on what we were doing with that particular child, I would normally only let them see a couple of them. I didn't want to overwhelm them with really hard things that scared them if I didn't feel like they were mentally prepared for that. And so if we were going to do an exposure ladder, it would be real, like they would just see like the next step and the next step. I wouldn't say, we're going to go and throw some candy on the floor and you're going to eat it, because that might be like way too overwhelming. And then they're like, I'll never do that. Right? So like if you're dealing with the metaphobia, the fear of throw up, I wouldn't say to someone that I'm treating a metaphobia with, I wouldn't say, we're going to get you to like, watch videos of people throwing up. They're going to run from my room. Maybe they can't even handle me say the word throw up. We're not there yet. So I might have to start with, we're going to get used to the word. We're going to start talking about throw, and we're going to do exposures around talking about throw. Throw me the ball. Throw me this, throw me that. That might be where I have to start with someone who is going to run out of the room when they hear the word throw up. I can't tell them they're going to watch videos of someone throwing up, even though that is the ultimate goal. If that is part of their emetophobia, is to really expose them to seeing that and desensitizing them to be able to handle the discomfort that that brings. But that's not what I'm going to introduce. And so with our kids, when we're doing exposures, we want to introduce something manageable. If it's a challenge, and I call anxiety, facing brave things with our anxiety, I call them challenges. And when we're talking about OCD, I call them exposures, because they are a little bit different. But if I'm wanting my child to go to school, and let's say they've been out of school due to anxiety for, a few months, I'm not going to say we're going to go a full day to school. I might, even though that's the ultimate goal, perhaps, I might say, we don't want to lose the muscle of getting used to school. So let's go drive into the parking lot when school is in session and sit outside the school for a little while so you can be exposed to the school, right? My ultimate goal is to maybe get them back full time, but we're not going to say, we need to get you back full time. We're running out of time. We feel the pressure. How do we get you back to school? It's like, you kind of you can't give them the full playbook because it overwhelms them. It overwhelms most people. So you want to just give them one step. Like, we just want to get you used to this. And that breeds hope. It gives kids empowerment. It makes them feel like they can do this. So that is the really important thing. The other thing that I feel is really helpful is that it gives you hope. If you start to notice the wins and you pick a goal or a step, and it's a doable step, let's say, and I'm trying to pick the most acute situations that I can remember from members in the AT parenting community. So yours might not be nearly as severe as what I'm talking about, but I'm trying to pick the most extreme to just show you. But let's say you have a child who's homebound. We have quite a few of those right now in the AT parenting community where they're not leaving the house because of typically contamination OCD. And so maybe they're sleeping all day and they're up all night and they're taking long showers. Like that's a common issue with quite a few of our members in the community. And the goal might be to be awake for more hours during the day at first. Or the goal might be to reduce the shower time by 5 minutes. They're really, really tiny goals, maybe even smaller than that. I don't know your child, but you're not looking at how do we get you to be fully awake during the day and sleeping at night and showering for about 5, 10, 15 minutes. And, those are lofty goals. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get there. It just means that you're starting one small step at a time. And so when we celebrate their ability to get to that goal, we start to feel hopeful too. Like, oh my gosh, we did get to that goal. And that feels good. It's kind of like when I take somebody's online course. Even though I create courses, I love taking other people's courses. And when they make really short videos, and I do this in my classes too, you do like really short videos, like 5 to 10 minutes. And as a parent, you start to feel really productive when you're like, I just watched like 5 videos, even though it might have been 25 minutes in total, but you feel good because like you check the finish button and then it goes on to the next video. And whenever I'm taking someone else's course, I always feel like super productive when I get through like a lesson and onto the next lesson, because those are little goals. You feel like you're moving in the right direction. If you're watching a 3-hour video and you're halfway through it and you have another full, 1.5 hours or whatever, it feels hopeless. You're like, oh my gosh, this course is never going to end. But the same thing with so small bite-sized videos, and you feel empowered. And that's why I do that with the kids course too, the Crushing OCD course for kids and teens. Small videos. The first video is the only video that I think is like 20 minutes long because it's a big introduction to what OCD is. But the rest of the classes are all like, the rest of the lessons are all like 5 to 10 minutes long, all under 10 minutes, I believe, because you want to feel that fulfillment of I'm doing something and I'm moving through this. Same thing when we're talking about exposures or challenges with our kids. So after the break, I want to talk about how to set this up in a really concrete way. How do you celebrate small wins? What are some skills to do? What are some techniques to do? We'll talk about that after the break.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so in the first half of the episode, we talked about the why. And a lot of it's obvious, but I think some of it we don't think about. So the why and celebrating the small wins. How do you do this, though? It may be easier said than done. Well, there are a couple of ways. One, I'm really big into incentives. Most anxiety and OCD therapists are big into incentives. Celebrating through bravery points is a great way to reinforce small wins. I do have a whole podcast episode on how to do that. So I'm not going to go into it here. I'm going to look it up for you though, because I go into detail about one should not type and talk in a podcast, by the way. Okay, episode 123. You think I'd remember this because I tell you about this episode every single time. Episode 123, developing good incentives to get kids to work on anxiety or OCD. That's a deep dive. I go into all the pitfalls that is so common that parents do when they set up an incentive plan, how to avoid them, how to set them up through this app that I use. It's a chore app that I recommend that's super easy to convert into a Bravery Points app that you can put on your child's electronics if they have one, and on your electronics. So I go into detail about all that. So check out that episode. The best way to check out episodes is go to my website at atparentingsurvival.com. Scroll to the bottom if you're on an iPad or desktop, and there's a search button at the bottom, and just type 123, and that should get you to that episode. If you're on a phone, just go to the menu button, the little hamburger button, and there should be a search in that, and then just type 123, the episode number. When you type in the episode number, it pops up. So feel free to do that and check that out. So that does help. I've used that a lot when I had kids in my practice. We would use Bravery Points. They would earn tickets from me, and they would, do their work, or we might even have them texting me different assignments. A lot of times it was like taking a picture of them doing an exposure, or a lot of times it was me sending them something. So if it was emetophobia, the fear of throw up, it might be me sending them an emoji, a throw up emoji. For some kids, that was really extreme. For them, that was really hard. And so if they saw it and they gave me a thumbs up, then they earned a point. So even as a therapist, I incorporated this. As a parent, I incorporate this on a daily basis with my kids. Ever since they were young and all diagnosed, we have had some sort of incentive plan where they earned points that they can cash in for all sorts of stuff. And that has changed over the years. Now that they're both teenagers, it's different things than obviously what it was when they're little. But there's no way for them to earn money except through doing exposures. That's just how our household is. That way they're not outsmarting the plan, because my kids would gladly do chores more than exposures. But if they know exposures is the only way they can get the thing that they want, they're motivated. But the episode 123 goes into detail about that. The other thing I would say is keep a journal or an Excel spreadsheet of your child's struggles. I actually have on my Apple phone, I have the Notes app. I use the Notes app like nonstop. It was funny. I thought nobody else uses the Notes app the way that I do. But then my sister-in-law was like, oh, I do too. And she had all these notes, and it made me feel better. I was like, I thought I was the only weirdo who uses notes in such a neurotic sort of way. Because I have all my notes. I have a million notes, and I use them every single day. But I have one note that is for each child. And I'll write down some of their core fears and their compulsions, and I'll date it. And then periodically, like every 3 months or whatever, I'll go back and look at that list. And more often than not, I'm like, oh my gosh, we've come so far. For my son, when he was really in the throes of his ARFID journey, I kept a food journal on an Excel spreadsheet and went through and categorized the most obvious, like safe foods that he had, his go-to foods that were in the yellow, that were like hard for him, but he was able to eat them, and like the no-go absolute trigger foods. And going back and revisiting that spreadsheet over time, I would date it as well, really helped me see the small wins, because I was like, wow, he can eat all these other foods. We're changing yellow to green. We're changing red to yellow, seeing the progress. So let me ask you, how do you document your child's progress? How do you know when they're getting better? The memory is not a good thing to depend on, because if you have more than one child, you obviously forgot how painful childbirth is, unless you had an epidural. My first child was not by choice. She was a natural delivery. I actually wound up having a blood clot, and they put a stent in me for my kidneys. My I forgot what those tubes are called. And no one told me that that would mean I couldn't have an epidural. So it was like the 11th hour that I was told, oh, by the way, you can't have an epidural. The guy actually came with the tray and was ready to do it and was just getting history. And I was like, yeah, I have a stent in me. And he's like, what? Oh, no epidural for you. Very, very horrible experience, but not about this topic today. But I waited, 7 years to have the next baby. Different man, second marriage, but it took me a long time to forget that. We have a very faulty memory, and we tend to forget how bad it was. And sometimes we tend to forget how good it is. And having an objective chart that helps you see where your kids are at can be really helpful. To be honest, I haven't gone back and looked at my kids to do their OCD anxiety list in a long time. And just for fun, I wanted to pull it up right now to look at it. And it's funny, with my daughter, I have listed just her themes now. I have updated it, and now it's just her themes. And it reminds me of where to go back to, like what her core fears are. Because it's a pretty big list actually. And these are all the themes she's ever had. And the bottom ones are interesting because they're newer, like existential. I wrote ruin things and change. And it's only been recently that I've realized that she has like almost a contamination OCD around moments getting ruined and change. Things can't change to a severe degree. So that's there to just remind me of that stuff because she's doing so well. I really have not had to depend on looking at my notes nearly as much as I used to. I used to look at them every few months when we were really in the thick of things, but she's been doing well for so long that I have updated them. I'm kind of looking for my son's one because I can't find it. Hold on, I'm going to look for it. Actually, I had extra notes. I have 108 notes. So I found my daughter, actually, I have a hierarchy note for her, and I have full details like anxiety and OCD themes, and then I have dates. And when I go back and I read these, it goes back to 2019. These are all things that we are not even worrying about anymore. So look at that. When I look at my son's, I wrote previous themes, compulsions over the years, and I wrote a whole list down. And then I start dating January 2019, April 2019. And it's interesting because I look back at these, and the good thing about writing these things down is that you start to see themes that happen over the years. Like your memory is not going to be so good and solid that you're going to start to see patterns because it's happening over such a long period of time. Like I'm looking at this, and I remember he had this whole thing where he felt really dizzy when he would eat. Like he felt like eating made him feel dizzy, and some moral OCD. And that was back in April of 2023. And that's not an issue anymore. I mean, him feeling dizzy, like that's completely gone. So do that. It's so fascinating that I've got distracted and I started to go through my own kids list on the podcast. But when I started that, I did that very frequently. I would do it every month. I'm in a good place right now where I don't need that as much. And you might be in a good place, but I would recommend if you don't have a history of documenting, just start now, even if your kids are in a good place. It's so priceless to have those notes. I mean, as I get older, the memory is not working, but just to read them, and don't make them so long that it's going to be a tedious task to read. Just the theme, the core fear, the compulsions, what they avoid, what they have to do, that kind of stuff. And then if you go and you look at that stuff every week or every month, normally like every month, you'll have some things to highlight to your kids. Hey, I was looking at my notes or whatever, and you have come a long way. Or I've done this actually a year later, saying, look, I was just going through some things that you're going, reading my notes, and these are all the things that you used to do that you don't do anymore. And that's a great way to celebrate. The other thing that you can have your kids do is write down their goals, what they're working on, and, when they crush them, or like their small wins, to record their small wins. If they're not like a journal kind of person, then maybe this isn't the thing for them. But I do feel like it's really helpful if they don't mind it. We never want to force them to do something that's supposed to be helpful that they find to be an annoying task. If it's an annoying task, then they shouldn't do it. But having them do like a win journal where they write down the things that they've done on a daily basis to crush their anxiety or OCD can be really helpful. And it could be an assignment. It could be like, write down at the end of the day all the times where you felt like you crushed your anxiety or OCD, or you delayed giving into your compulsion. Put the date on there. And if you're doing bravery points and you listen to the other podcast about incentives, maybe you offer a point or two for recording it. An extra incentive for taking the time to write those wins. Just writing down the wins is celebrating. It's really hardwiring it into their brain what they did, right? Like when you revisit something and you highlight it, your brain is learning it for the second time. And so it makes it even more powerful. The other thing is write down the micro goals that you're doing. And so write down the small goal and how they're doing. And set up the idea that it is about their effort. So, because sometimes we pick goals or we do exposures or we pick challenges that they don't succeed in. And so we have the power to reshape those into a win. And a lot of times parents are like a little bit black and white, like, oh, OCD beat you this time. But if we can paint that in a win in any way, it's powerful because we're getting them to see it through a growth mindset, and we're getting them to see it through effort, not result. And that really is the most important thing in the short term, is the effort. We don't want to dissuade the effort. So another thing that I really like is having a win board. And so this was actually an AT Parenting community member's idea a few years ago, and I loved it. And so now I teach it and credit that person just by saying it was one of our parents. And she created a win board. So she had this whiteboard and they would write all of the wins over the week. And everybody got involved. The parents would write their wins, and I started one in my house. And that was really helpful to see the wins and see people writing their own wins on the board, getting our kids to recognize their own wins. When I started the win board, we don't have it right now. We actually have a task board because my son is doing, well, actually, what happened was after my husband died 3 years ago, my brain like literally left my body, and well, not literally, but I needed to have a to-do board of like, okay, at 10 o'clock, we're doing this, 11 o'clock. And so my whiteboard has turned into a schedule board, but it was a win board at one point, and maybe we should turn it back into a win board or do a win tree. One member did a win tree, and I thought that was a cool idea as well. And I remember my kids were writing wins from their school day that I never would have even heard from. You know, when you say, hey, how was your day? And they, good, anything happened? No, right? You get nothing. But when you have this win board, all of a sudden, my daughter was writing things down that I didn't know were a struggle. And she was writing it down as a win because she was able to overcome it. And I was learning a lot about their anxiety or OCD from the things that they were celebrating. And it was more powerful that they're writing their wins, they're celebrating their wins versus me celebrating it. Because there is a danger in us inadvertently conveying to our kids that their success in crushing anxiety or OCD gains our approval or gets our approval. And their failures with anxiety or OCD gets our, what's the right word? It's not, I don't know the right word. I got a few hours of sleep last night. I'm exhausted, but it's disapproval. Boy, that was scary. We don't want it to be about our relationship with our kids, right? Because then it's about them impressing us and doing it for us instead of doing it for them. And the one message I really want people to solidly understand, whether it be my own kids or the kids I'm working with or the kids in the AT parenting community even, is that this is their journey. It's not our journey. We're here to support them and coach them and cheerlead them and connect them to really good resources. But ultimately, this is their journey, and we are in the driver's seat. We are not, no, man, I should just take a nap. We're in the passenger seat. We are not in the driver's seat. And we don't want them to ever think that we're in the driver's seat, because then they let go of the wheel and they let us steer, and we cannot steer for the rest of their lives. And so we we inadvertently incapacitate their ability to function long-term on their own independently. We don't want that. And so I'm really careful with how I say praise. And I often will say, wow, you should really be proud of yourself. You're crushing it. Or you should be impressed. You know, you really crushed your OC. I'm always putting it on them, not like I'm impressed or I'm proud of you. Sometimes I slip up and speak like a normal human being and I say, oh, I'm so proud of you. You did such a great job, right? But if I'm thinking intentionally, which, you know, half the time, obviously I'm not, I could barely string a sentence together today, but I would want to say, you should be so proud of yourself. I bet that felt really good for you. I bet that felt really awesome, the way you crushed it today. Always deflecting. It's not deflecting, it's the wrong word, but I'm always putting it back on them in a positive way. So that can be helpful. The last thing I would suggest, and these are just, you know, incorporate what would work in your family, but a weekly summary of wins might be helpful. We actually do this in the AT parenting community every Friday in our member-only Facebook group. We, you know, I have a challenge and win thread, and I'll say, like, what was your win for the week? What was your challenge? But end with the win because it feels better, right? You can vent with the challenge, but we're going to end with the win. And it does feel different when you read it and it's the win and then the challenge. It's like, yay, we did this, but this, right? Versus, oh, this is hard, but this, right? And it's not just, you know, insignificant as far as how we talk about our challenge and our wins. We actually do this in the AT Parenting Community support group calls too, the ones with the parents and the ones with the kids and with the ones with the teens. We start with the wins before we move into the support group call because I want to celebrate the small things. And a lot of times it's crickets on all three calls. And I'll be like, come on, dig deep, think about it. Any small win is a win. What can you think of? What would be a win? And even with the parents, crickets. And then eventually it starts to, one person's hand goes up, then another person's. And then sometimes I have to go first and say, let me think of a win for me. And I'll go first because our brain, a lot of times when we're on this journey with our kids, it's not geared towards thinking of the wins. We're thinking of the problems because those are the things that are dominating our brain space. It's like, this is overwhelming me. I need support with this. But let's shift that and think about the small wins and celebrate those first. And I think that's really important. The AT Parenting Community is closed right now. I know I keep talking about that. So if you are interested, you can check it out at atparentingcommunity.com. We do open the doors every few months, so get on the wait list and you'll get notified and join our community and share your wins and successes in our support group calls. Such a great, great group of parents in there. So I hope that today kind of just refreshed your enthusiasm for coming up with concrete ways on how to celebrate the small wins on a frequent basis in your home with your child. Even with yourself, your wins. What was your win as a parent today, right? This can all be applied to you as well. Like, what's your small goal? What's your micro goal? Is it just waking up and hoping that you don't lose your cool today? That's my goal. That's one of my big goals is I just want to be intentional and calm no matter what chaos is going on. And sometimes I knock it out of the park and sometimes it was a struggle. And sometimes I'm aware that I'm struggling, and that's a win because there was an awareness while I was losing it. Baby goal, right? Baby goals are important. Well, I hope that you're finding the podcast helpful. If you are, don't forget to hit a star and write a review. I really appreciate it when you write a review. To show my gratitude, I always end with reading one if there was a new one. And there is, thank you to Natty85, who wrote Lifeline. Hi, I've been listening for a while now, but wanted to let you know what a lifeline this has been as a parent of a child with OCD and anxiety. Each episode gives me more insight on how to help him, and the tools I've gained just from listening are invaluable. Thank you for putting these out there. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for taking the time. Sorry, my voice is getting weird. Thank you for taking the time to write a review, and maybe if you write a review, I'll be reading yours next time. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do, and I will talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.